is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm Gaius. Germanicus is here. We're by the Thames. It is 91 AD, a beautiful spring evening. And we're looking at the politics of the 21st century. I rush to say this is our live broadcast. We're sitting here with retired centurions. Everybody's having a very good time. The wine, for some reason, is unusually sweet. Good for them. At the same time, the town, Londinium, is doing very well, prospering. We're at the edge of the empire. We will be the first to be abandoned in the 4th to 5th century AD, but not yet, not yet. We're at the edge of having a good run. Our emperor is Domitian. Nobody likes him. But that doesn't matter. The Senate doesn't like him. Therein lies the problem. But after Domitian, we'll have a good run of about 80 years. And then after that, the empire will hold together despite the best efforts of the barbarians, of internal dissent, of the usual rascals in Rome. It'll hold together for another 1,000 years after the trouble in the 5th century. And then it's a memory. Well, we remember it because for some reason, here in the 1st century AD, we're able to see the 21st in every century and every century in between. And Germanicus and I have enjoyed speculating about the events of the 21st century in America because America inherited the Roman model. Have you asked yourself why it is that, oddly, American males, when they're asked do they think about Rome, they acknowledge they think about it every day, often, repeatedly? This little fact doesn't make any sense except for we understand it. I note that American women, when given this fact, say something like they do. It's amazement. Now, why do these young males and the older males too, why do they think about Rome? Because they're aware of the fact that they're living in a civilization that's built on the foundation of the Roman Empire, the one we're living in. And we're going to turn to our experience with the Roman Empire between now, 91 AD, and let's say Attila the Hun, about the middle of the 5th century, because we recognize that there will be repeated episodes of disorder challenging the cohesion of the empire. Eventually, it will break it in half. And Germanicus does a wonderful job of representing the winning half. That would be Constantinople, the Eastern Empire. It becomes Greek-speaking. It becomes Greek. Whereas I am more comfortable in the Western half, which descends so that Rome, a city of 1 million people at one point in our lifetimes, will go down to about 10,000 in the year 1000 AD. It will be crushed, ignored entirely as civilization passes it by, and then it revives. All that is in the future. We're going to address the future because these last days has brought an episode that we recognize, which is how to start a war. Germanicus, a very good evening to you. I tell the fairy tale. Once upon a time, there was a young nation, we'll call it David. And David was facing an experienced predator nation, we'll call it Goliath. And David was losing badly because Goliath was mighty and had a great army and overwhelming David, until David came up with an idea, which was to use a slingshot, or in this case, innocent truck drivers, we're told, carrying small buildings, we're told. And when those buildings opened up, these huts, these shepherd huts, swarms of explosive-laden suicide drones came out, buzzing around the air and attacking strategic aircraft on the tarmac as far away as Irkutsk and Murmansk, all over across Russia, we're told. And at the end, everyone was acknowledging that the Davids of Ukraine have mighty punch and that Russia was on its heels, Goliath, and that perhaps this matchup between these two unequals was going the way of the heroes after all. That's the fairy tale. How do you like it, Germanicus? Good evening to you.
I like fairy tales because they impart a sense of wonder and possibility. And wonder and possibility is what these attacks conjure. And Ukraine needs a lot of wonder and possibility in its current degraded state. And I say degraded not just in physical terms, but to some extent in moral terms as well. I have to impart these numbers. From January to date, less than 6 months, 90,000 Ukrainians have deserted the army. Ukraine's regime will not accept 6,000 bodies from Russia in an exchange. And why will they not accept them? They want to be able to not pay up to the poor widows and families who will eventually receive them to their final resting place. Well, they're just not, they don't want to pay. And these are all symptoms of a society not just fraying, but beginning to come apart. And there are a lot of indications, and we talk about this every week, that things are continuing to progress. So what looks like a stalemate, and what all of the pusillanimous American media commentators, especially the retired generals and admirals, all on the boards of very powerful defense contractors, say is, oh, it's a stalemate. It'll always be a stalemate. And in fact, things are gathering momentum every single week. And what this attack does, and the reason it is so interesting, is that it highlights, first of all, the absolute dependence of Ukraine on pursuing a battlefield strategy whose sole objective is to continue to keep American eyeballs, and to some extent European eyeballs, and all of their money flowing into Ukraine. And that's a terrible strategy. Had Ukraine pursued a purely defensive hedgehog strategy from the beginning, they would be in a much better position. They would have inflicted many more losses on the Russians and would have suffered much less themselves. And they would have conserved a lot of their weapons, et cetera, et cetera. But the strategy they've pursued has been profligate in the extreme. Their losses have been so heavy that there is very little left that they can do except throw untrained men in as cannon fodder, essentially, into the arms, as it were, of drones, the very drones that were used in the attack on the Russian airfields.
The attack on the Russian airfields is what I recognize that doesn't follow through on the David against Goliath. Those are strategic bombers. They're associated with a triad. As we have a triad, Russia has a triad. You have the silo missile fleet, you have the submarine missile fleet, and you have the bombers. And the reason you need the bombers is that they can be recalled in the event of an accident or a settlement before the bombs are dropped. The missiles cannot be recalled, and the submarines are not easily communicated with because that's the nature of those the boomers. Striking at the one part of the Russian Empire that is responsible in the event of an Armageddon-like incident, which we've had several times in the last 80 years. We don't need to review them. Everybody knows about them or should. Strikes at Russia's ability to control its own military. It's peculiar. Now, why would they do this? And I can't come up with a reason other than what you just said, to continue the war. But Germanicus, continue the war at the strategic level? That is reckless.
There is a rationale. It is reckless, and that's the whole point. As I said a moment ago, the sole objective is to keep the money flowing and the support flowing, and that isn't happening anymore. So ipso facto, it is absolutely necessary, de rigueur, that the Ukrainians engage in actions that will escalate the war. Because only through escalation at this point can America be kept engaged as Ukraine's master and commander, shall we say. And Mr. Trump, however, is not inclined to continue to support Ukraine, knowing that he's being used and that this is prolonging the war. However, it has to be said that Britain, France, and Germany, almost as desperately as Ukraine, need to keep the U.S. engaged. They need the U.S. engaged to prop up their regimes and to keep the war going in ways that give them the ultimate domestic political dispensation, which is that we live in a war emergency. But they know they can't pursue the war on their own. They have no military capability. So they need the U.S. And the only way to keep the U.S. in is to hook it. And this attack was a hook. And it doesn't seem to be working. Or, in fact, one could say it is having the opposite effect. And the sensation everywhere that I hear is that this entire attack was planned and designed in concert with the British MI6, which would indicate that this is increasingly a Ukrainian-European war. Plus, the Germans have said they will allow Ukraine to use the long-range Taurus missiles on any target they wish. In effect, they're striving for an escalation that will, at the same time, keep the U.S. hooked. And that isn't happening. So in many ways, this is a self-defeating operation. It was largely ineffective in that only 2 or 3 aircraft of the Tu-95Ms were destroyed. And therefore, it's not a Pearl Harbor, but in their desperation, that was how the U.S. media and the European media has portrayed this attack. And I think in many ways, there's a kind of hidden strategic serendipity to this event because it accelerates the pace at which the U.S. pulls back from the war and thus accelerates the possibility of a settlement nearer rather than farther away.
Germanicus is Michael Vlahos. I am Gaius John Batchelor. We are in Londinium enjoying ourselves, puzzled at the recklessness of the decision makers in London, perhaps, in Langley, likely, remembering that Ukraine has been well, let's put it this way. The agency has been heavily involved in decision-making since 2014.
Yes.
We cannot know whether any of this is real. We can't tell. And that's the nature of the story that the agency and MI6 know how to tell. And we applaud them. They're good at it. They don't know if it's real or not either. So we're going to turn to something that is, which is a rinse and repeat on street protests in America while Donald Trump is in the White House. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm John Batchelor. It's the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius. Germanicus is here. We've entertained ourselves speculating about the 21st century conduct of David, Goliath, of Ukraine, Russia, and the suppose David had had help of an agency like the CIA or the MI6 would have been an entertaining twist in the Bible story. But in any event, we're more interested now in applying what we've learned from 2020. about how it works in America to make the media your ally and then your client, which is what we're witnessing right now in Los Angeles. We witnessed it in 2020, peaceful protests during the pandemic. And for some reason, suddenly going out in large crowds in the street wasn't going to spread the pandemic. That was a fairy tale we were told back in 2020, before the election and after the election. But now we have protests in Los Angeles, not about the pandemic, nor about a murder in Minneapolis, but instead we're looking at protests over something that is very straightforward and you all know about. We have millions of people without documents in the United States, and they've been deported routinely for years by presidents. Mr. Obama did it. Mr. Biden was supposed to be doing it. Sometimes he did, sometimes he didn't. Mostly he didn't. Mr. Trump is doing it. There's no reason to introduce this with new facts. There are no new facts. But the protests in Los Angeles the last several days, I was watching television in Australia, Channel 9, one of their big channels, a package, and they actually have a correspondent in Los Angeles, and she was doing a very good job of reporting the tear gassing of the protesters, I believe, on the first afternoon of the protest. And I thought, what's this? Australia? Evening news covers Los Angeles? But it turned out it was a wise decision on the part of the studio, because Australia has a lot of immigrants as well, and they study how the U.S. is dealing with them. The version we have right now is that the governor of California, who is a candidate for the Democratic nomination in 2028, so he's a presidential level decision maker, Mr. Newsom, has criticized the White House for using a U.S. law that gives the president the power to send in the National Guard of the state that's in trouble. The law uses the word rebellion, and I'm sure the White House is repeating that now. The governor says it's provocative. I believe the mayor says it as well, but I know the governor says it. Other voices in Los Angeles say it's provocative. In any event, I'm not getting caught up in the details here because we've seen this before. It's guerrilla theater. Germanicus and I, when we were younger men, we saw guerrilla theater about the Vietnam War. It's staged, it's ceremonial, everybody knows what they're doing. In fact, Germanicus, do you remember in college, I believe, maybe I saw it in the 60s and you were a little bit later than me, you're a younger man, that the SDS would chant "Chicks Up Front"? Do you remember that?
No, there was a giant protest in my freshman year. No, my sophomore year. It was at Yale. It was a Bobby Seale protest. And so students from colleges all over the Northeast descended on Yale and were fed by the president of Yale at his command. And the National Guard was called up and they tear gassed everyone. I was upset that it was happening and I left. It was on a weekend. I wasn't going to be there. But my friends would tell me, oh, it was great fun. You know, we'd get high smoking marijuana fags and then run out and get tear gassed and then go back to our rooms and smoke some more. And that was, you talk about performative, it was also fun. That was considered good times.
Well, the Chicks Up Front was the SDS's version of manipulating the police, because the assumption was the police, who were called porcine at the time,
Yes, they would
not use their clubs on young women. I also remember they enjoyed the protest that one weekend at the Pentagon where they put barrel. How trite. I wonder if they're using that one, whether the kids have seen the video of the old days. I know it's all black and white, and they don't like black and white video to learn from.
They won't watch it.
Let me get to the end of this. Peaceful protest, sure, we go along with that. And tear gassing, sure, we go along with that. Send in the National Guard, sure. It feels Germanicus, it doesn't feel stale so much as what else have you got? We're not entertained this time. It's like we've been to the Colosseum and the lions are old and sort of lazy, and they're not doing a good job of tearing the Christians apart. That's what it feels like.
Well, like the Trojan horse, Pearl Harbor, David and Goliath attack of Ukraine. Uh, this too is the ultimate in performance art, and it is also destined not just to backfire, but to materially hurt the blue cause. It brings back the worst kind of memories from 2020, which was an election that electrically divided the country, and to bring that up as the best you've got, and then to suggest, or more than suggest, declare that this is the path ahead, and this is our bridge to the midterms when we take back the House and then start the impeachment proceedings again, is, I think, not going to play well with Americans. Americans don't want a civil war. They don't want the country to descend into anarchy. And given the kind of spike in crime that occurred in 2020 as a result of the riots, I think that this will only hurt the quote unquote loyal opposition if it seeks to get back into gear. You can't go back to the well when the well is already poisoned for good.
Germanicus, a detail here. Whether it does or does not have an effect on the political life, it's not original. And that the whole idea of seeing a war movie that's not original, it's repeating The Great Escape. Hey, I've seen this movie. What are they doing? That's what it feels like. We've seen this movie. There are no tricks. I keep waiting for something new. Oh, yes, they're protesting about deportations. I guess that's new, although it's not really a centerpiece. You can't really feature it as the reason we're protesting is, and then you fill in the blank, Washington is not listening. At least Vietnam had that. They don't have anything comparable to feature, the protesters, to feature to say, see, this is unacceptable. It's not unacceptable to do what is done every time the authorities deal with somebody who doesn't have documents. And in this instance, as I understand it, so far, the Trump administration has been a little clumsy about deporting.
It has, yeah.
They're weak, and they've been concentrating on young people who have criminal records, which is cherry picking. But that's what they've been doing. And they're all caught up in procedure, and federal judge after federal judge puts temporary restraining orders on. So I don't know if anybody's actually being deported. I can't tell. The planes are flying back and forth. Everybody's claiming this is a sanctuary city, and Trump's sending in the National Guard, and maybe everybody's still here.
Well, Blue loves to talk about the Overton window, and shifting the Overton window is a kind of clarion call of the progressive cause. But you can't shift the Overton window when it comes to the Constitution and to the body of law that we live by. You can't just disallow it. They've tried hard. I mean, you mentioned Mr. Obama. He deported millions more than Trump ever has.
At a fast pace, much faster pace.
Yes, and sometimes rather roughly. And now suddenly it is illegal to deport people who are here illegally. And part of the attempt to shift the Overton window is vested in a larger proscenium in which the nature of America itself was to be redefined. That was the heart of the Church of Woke. And part of redefining America itself is to redefine patriotism and loyalty to the nation, or the idea of the nation itself as something worthy and beautiful to serve, is now considered the height of racism and fascism. And hence, deporting people who are merely, like all of us, citizens of the world, is the way in which they think. It's not so much a shift in the Overton window as it is a shift in the narrow world view of the blue elite, and it doesn't wash with the majority of Americans, including not only American immigrants who've come here legally, but the so-called people of color. They don't like it either. Nobody in America likes the idea of people getting a free ride and breaking the law and being patted on the back for it.
Maybe I've overemphasized the ceremony. It's a little sloppy this time. You know, the pallets of bricks. It's kind of like, okay, throwing rocks at ice cars. Okay, fine. But
it's weak because pallets.
I want some original.
They're pallets of concrete blocks. How are you going to throw a concrete block? You have to break it up.
I want something original. That's all.
Yeah,
I mean,
I agree.
Early days, things can happen. We're going to turn to a story that everybody knows, but nobody knows what to do about, which is the decision by our colleagues, reporters, not to mention Mr. Biden was not well, not to mention it for 4 years, still not mentioning it. This is the Friends of History Debating Society with Germanicus. It's a beautiful spring evening in Londinium, and 20 centuries from now, it's a head scratcher. Why didn't anybody speak up? 4 years of it. I am Gaius, John Batchelor. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. We'll be right back, puzzled. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. Gaius and Germanicus are here in our favorite wine bar with the Centurions by the Thames, which is calm tonight. It's a mild air, a little humid in Londinium. All the merchants are feeling well financed. Trade has been going on ferociously. This is Rome, and we're at the beginning of a good run. However, we've been speculating about the 21st century, and I realize, Germanicus, I've had the same theme in 2 of our conversations. This is live, so Germanicus and I don't get to rehearse anything. The theme is I'm not entertained. I'm not entertained by the agency or MI6 staging a so-called David strike at Goliath, and I'm not entertained at repetition of 2020 with street protests. You know, bandanas tied on their faces, charging around, throwing water in each other's eyes because there's tear gas. The police lining up across the street, CNN reporting it as violence. You know, we rinse and repeat. And I realize this story that we're about to do is the same thing. The media did not bother to tell us that they could tell, that we could tell, that Joe Biden wasn't well and wasn't functioning as is expected from a chief executive of the United States of America. For how long? I don't need to name it. It was pretty clear from the moment he was nominated in 2020 that he wasn't the same as he was before. And yet, major, very responsible people held that in check for 4 years and still hold it in check. There's been no adequate explanation, collectively or individually, why this has happened, leaving us to puzzle as for ourselves why it's happened. Yes, there have been stories heretofore that we're told, the example I have, Germanicus, is the War of the Worlds, October of 1938, staged by the very young man named Orson Welles and the RKO Radio Theater. One Friday night in New York, they decided to do a War of the Worlds script in radio without telling people this was fiction. I mean, you don't really have to. It's War of the Worlds, but in any event. And they pretend that the Martian craft were landing in New Jersey, and they had an interview on but beyond the capability of anybody in radio in 1938, a Princeton professor coming on saying, well, the sphere is down there, it's glowing, I don't know who's coming out. And people were said to have been frightened at home, making calls to the RKO studio. Anyway, it was an elaborate fairy tale that it took some time to convince people it hadn't happened. That's the example I can give of the media using its power of persuasion and running into difficulties. Now, there was a reason for that alarm in America at the time. It was October of 38. 38, Germanicus. So you'd have to say the headlines were a little alarming and had been since the springtime. 38. And we know the following year was the war. So
it was the month of Munich, yeah.
Perhaps they had more excuse than we have today for willingly going along with the let's pretend Biden's president. Doesn't somebody, isn't it? Well, I know I'm being lighthearted here, but it's funny, isn't it?
It is, but only if you are of a really mordant cast of mind. The truth is, it's very depressing and sad, and it is as though in a twinkling, the entire mainstream media was transformed into the media of the late Soviet Union. One of the charms of, say, YouTube or other places that have videos posted is you can watch videos of the ailing Leonid Brezhnev after several strokes attempting to address the Soviet people. And it is as though he were the brother of Joe Biden. And yet the media went along, and they went along through the next aged and infirm dying emperors like Andropov and Chernenko. And the Soviet Union, in effect, had become a souffle of lies. And the media eagerly embraced being the mouthpiece, like the mouth of Sauron in Lord of the Rings. It embraced being the mouthpiece of lies. And it did so in a way that transformed their ethos. So it is impossible to look at any kind of media personality or media output that's mainstream and think of it as being anything close to a treatment of the truth. It's simply all a confabulation. And in that sense, they've become a different culture. And they have, like Blue in general, speaking of those riots, they have no creativity left, in large part because if you hearken back to the Soviet media, they were devoted Marxists. And in Marxism, the lie is the means to power, and power is all that counts, and all morality flows from the virtue that is inherent in the lie. If the lie gets you to the dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, America's mainstream media isn't classically Marxist in any way, but it has assumed the entire theological framework on which Marxism is posited in terms of how you structure a society. And so the morality is to lie because Joe Biden was good and he represented the apotheosis of virtue, and therefore to lie, to preserve him in office, was an expression of the highest good in oneself.
What I'm struck by is how there's no explanation for it. It's being skipped. An explanation, it wouldn't give us any new facts. We had the facts in front of us. It would give us an understanding of what it feels like to participate in a construction at that scale. We didn't get that for Russiagate. There was never any moment.
They're still keeping it up.
They didn't come forward and say, we were wrong. It's sort of like, well, all I heard was we didn't get all of it. Oh, okay, fine.
Well, John, I'm convinced that the Soviet Union collapsed not out of any sort of economic um, failing or any collapse on the part of its military. It was a collapse of trust at the absolute existential level among the entirety of society because the entire state had become a lie. And this is the main problem that Blue and the Democrats have to face. And included among them, of course, is that mainstream media. They don't understand that the reason great empires collapse in the end is the loss of trust. And the way to get to that point is to enshrine the lie as your highest virtue. The lie brings down empires, and that's what has happened in large part to the US under their tutelage.
I'm trying to find a way forward that is not witty, but I can't. So I'm going to try this. Do we agree that America knew the truth? America knew it every day. Not only we knew about Joe Biden and his Politburo, they call themselves the Politburo. I find it quite fantastic that was their wisdom to running the country.
They do know the truth. Obviously, it's self-confessed.
Right, but I mean, every day we knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. The only one who didn't know was Joe Biden because he wasn't really tracking. And we knew the media was doing it, and the media knew we knew it. So, in fact, their lie didn't work. We just went along with it because, hey, we have our lives to live. If it's okay with you that he can't really read the speech, it's okay with us.
Well, regular people knew the truth, but they had also bought into the one thing that kept the Democrats and their machine and all of Blue going in government was the specter of the devil himself.
Well, right.
The devil incarnate. And that they've lost that now because the one amazing exculpation that Trump was able to seize during the campaign this past fall was that he was able to present himself to Americans as not being the devil, and not only that, in his own way, he was making fun of himself and exposing things was seen as more trustworthy. And of course, he didn't have a high level of trust, but the fact that people said, "Well, I've got to go with this guy instead of the Blue establishment," and they're still pushing the Trump thing, and it's over. That souffle collapsed in November.
I want to be difficult, Germanicus. I think MAGA's got to give me something new too. If I'm holding the street protesters to give me a twist here I haven't seen before. I want MAGA to do that. MAGA's in rinse repeat too.
Same. Yeah, they are, and that's a danger for them. MAGA worked best as the principled truth tellers out of power, the doughty insurgents, and they're no longer the doughty insurgents, and now they run the risk of becoming the very thing that they were always accused of being by Blue. And so their only hope is that Blue, being so indissolubly wedded to this creepy culture that they have adopted, will be unable to wrench themselves away from it and create something new, even though they're very good Democrat analysts who are crying for Blue to do just that, and they're offering pathways to that potentially.
They want something original.
Yeah. Well, they have. You can't go back to the well, except in the most, again, existential sense.
Well, I want something original from MAGA. I'm being a tough.
Yeah, I do too. I do too. It's frustrating to see it become a caricature of itself, if that's possible.
Here's a word that will bother them: corporatist. That's the way they're behaving.
I think every administration is either in danger of or more likely inevitably going to be taken over by corporate power, because that's what rules. And that includes, of course, the corporate power of the so-called deep state. And this is a fact in American life, and it won't change until the whole house of cards comes down. And nobody wants that because of the attendant misery and mayhem that will ensue.
An entertaining evening in Ukraine, pretending they did it. In Los Angeles, pretending that we're frightened. And in Washington, pretending that Joe Biden. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. Gaius and Germanicus. We're headed to the theater. We're going to see more Greek plays, although I've come to entertain the fact that the Greeks wrote comedy. This is going to be another scene from the clouds about Socrates running the thinkery. I didn't quite get it at first, but apparently the Greeks think this is funny. I don't know why. They think philosophy is funny. I've got to work on that. As a Roman citizen, I take philosophy as in small doses, and I can't remember it very long. Whereas,
Well, Romans are configured not to get it, so you shouldn't worry.
well, I don't worry that much, Germanicus.
I know.
We'll sacrifice to Augustus on the way. Friends of History Debating Society in Londinium. I'm John Batchelor.